This is absolutely outrageous. SmackDown General Manager Nick Aldis just made the most controversial and shocking decision in WWE history by firing Drew McIntyre, one of WWE's biggest stars and most loyal performers, after Drew delivered what Aldis called an unprovoked and excessively violent assault on Jacob Fatu that left the Samoan werewolf hospitalized with serious injuries. And what makes this decision absolutely infuriating is that Aldis is apparently ignoring weeks of provocation, disrespect, and attacks that Fatu directed at Drew first, choosing instead to make an example of the Scottish Warrior by terminating his contract in front of millions of viewers. Drew McIntyre, a former WWE champion, a WrestleMania main eventer, someone who stayed with WWE during the pandemic when he could have left, is now unemployed because Nick Aldis decided to play judge, jury, and executioner without considering the full context of what happened. I need you to drop a comment immediately if you think Nick Aldis is on a power trip and that firing Drew McIntyre is the most unjust decision a WWE authority figure has ever made, because this isn't about enforcing rules or protecting wrestlers' safety, this is about Aldis flexing his authority and showing everyone that he's in charge regardless of who gets hurt in the process. Drew McIntyre gave everything to WWE for years, worked through injuries, carried shows during empty arena era, and his reward is being fired on live television without due process, without a hearing, without any chance to defend his actions or explain his side of the story. This is corporate tyranny disguised as maintaining order. But before I break down every brutal moment of the attack that led to Drew's firing, before I reveal what Jacob Fatu did to push Drew to his breaking point, and before I expose the backstage politics that actually led to this decision and why some people believe Nick Aldis had been looking for an excuse to fire Drew for weeks, you need to smash that like button if you believe Drew McIntyre was wrongfully terminated and deserves to be reinstated immediately. Because what I'm about to tell you about the real reasons behind this firing, the massive backlash WWE is facing from fans and wrestlers, and the nuclear lawsuit Drew's lawyers are preparing against WWE is going to make you furious about how one of wrestling's best performers was treated. Let me start with the attack itself that supposedly justified Drew's firing, because understanding exactly what happened is crucial to determining whether Aldis's decision was justified or completely wrong. The incident occurred during a SmackDown segment where Jacob Fatu was cutting a promo in the ring, talking about his dominance and how nobody in WWE could stop him. Fatu had been on a tear recently, destroying opponents and acting increasingly arrogant and disrespectful. During this promo, Fatu started specifically calling out Drew McIntyre by name, mocking Drew's Scottish heritage, calling him a has-been and a failure, and making personal attacks about Drew's family and his struggles to reach the top of WWE. These weren't just typical wrestling insults. Fatu crossed lines by bringing up Drew's real-life family situation and making comments that were genuinely hurtful and inappropriate. Drew's music hit and the Scottish Warrior came storming down to the ring with fury in his eyes. Drew had been dealing with Fatu's provocations for weeks, backstage confrontations, social media attacks, interference in Drew's matches. Drew had tried to handle things professionally, requesting official matches through proper channels, but Fatu kept dodging those challenges while continuing to run his mouth. When Drew entered the ring, Fatu smiled that arrogant smirk and started talking more trash, clearly trying to bait Drew into doing something reckless. Drew grabbed a microphone and tried to challenge Fatu to an official match right there, giving Fatu a chance to back up his words. But Fatu refused, claiming Drew wasn't worth his time and turning to leave the ring. That's when Drew snapped. After weeks of provocation, after Fatu disrespecting his family, after being denied the chance to settle this in a proper match, Drew grabbed Fatu from behind and started delivering punishment. A Claymore kick that dropped Fatu instantly. But Drew didn't stop there. He grabbed Fatu's leg and started stomping on it repeatedly, clearly trying to injure the limb. WWE officials rushed to the ring to stop Drew, but the Scottish Warrior fought them off. Drew was in a zone. All the frustration and anger from weeks of dealing with Fatu's BS came pouring out in a sustained assault that lasted several minutes. Drew hit another Claymore. Then he grabbed a steel chair from ringside and delivered multiple chair shots to Fatu's back and legs. The attack was brutal, no question. Drew was hitting Fatu with everything he had, and Fatu, who had been talking so tough moments earlier, was completely unable to defend himself. Medical personnel finally got involved, surrounding Fatu to protect him while security literally had to restrain Drew and drag him away from the ring. The visual was disturbing. Fatu lying motionless in the ring, medical staff frantically checking him, while Drew was being held back by multiple security guards, still trying to get at Fatu. The crowd was mixed in their reaction. Some were cheering Drew for finally giving Fatu what he deserved, others were shocked by the level of violence. Now here's where things get controversial. Nick Aldis came out immediately after the attack and announced that Drew McIntyre was suspended indefinitely pending investigation. That alone would have been understandable. WWE needed to evaluate what happened and determine appropriate consequences. But then Aldis dropped the bombshell that changed everything. 2 days later, without any public hearing or chance for Drew to present his side, Aldis appeared on SmackDown and announced, after reviewing the incident from this past Monday, after consulting with WWE management and legal teams, I have made the decision to terminate Drew McIntyre's contract effective immediately. His actions were inexcusable, excessively violent, and put another performer's safety at serious risk. Drew McIntyre is no longer a WWE superstar. The crowd booed loudly at this announcement. Aldis tried to justify the decision. I understand some fans may disagree with this decision, but as SmackDown General Manager, I have a responsibility to maintain order and protect all superstars under my watch. What Drew did crossed every line, and there must be consequences. But his words rang hollow to many who felt this was an extreme overreaction. Let's talk about Jacob Fatu's injuries because the severity, or alleged severity, was a major factor in Aldis's decision. WWE released a statement claiming Fatu suffered multiple contusions, a possible concussion, and significant damage to his left knee that may require surgery. These injuries were cited as evidence of how dangerous and reckless Drew's attack was. However, multiple sources have questioned the accuracy of these injury reports. Some people backstage believe Fatu's injuries are being exaggerated to justify Aldis's decision to fire Drew. They point out that Fatu was able to walk to the back under his own power, with assistance, and that the possible concussion and knee damage requiring surgery seem like convenient diagnoses that make Drew look worse. There are even rumors that Fatu himself is embellishing his condition because he knows it strengthens his position and weakens Drew's. Fatu has allegedly been seen backstage walking normally and showing no signs of serious injury, yet WWE's official statements continue to paint him as severely hurt. This discrepancy has many people questioning whether there's an agenda at play. Now let me reveal the backstage politics that many believe really led to Drew's firing, because according to sources within WWE, Nick Aldis has had issues with Drew McIntyre for months. The problems apparently started when Drew questioned some of Aldis's booking decisions in a producers' meeting, suggesting that certain storylines weren't making sense or weren't using talent effectively. Aldis reportedly took Drew's feedback as personal criticism and began viewing Drew as difficult to work with. From that point forward, according to multiple sources, Aldis started looking for opportunities to punish Drew or cut him down to size. Drew started getting fewer prominent storylines, his wins became less decisive, and he was generally being positioned lower on the card than his talent warranted. The situation with Jacob Fatu provided Aldis with the perfect excuse to remove Drew entirely. By framing Drew's attack as inexcusable and excessively violent, Aldis could fire Drew while claiming to be protecting wrestler safety and maintaining order. In reality, according to backstage sources, this was Aldis settling a personal vendetta disguised as an administrative decision. Multiple WWE superstars have privately expressed support for Drew and criticism of Aldis's handling of this situation. Some have pointed out the hypocrisy of firing Drew for an attack that, while intense, wasn't significantly different from countless other beatdowns WWE has featured over the years. Why is Drew being held to a different standard? Why is Fatu being treated as an innocent victim when he provoked this situation? There are reports that a group of wrestlers approached Triple H directly to express concerns about Aldis's decision. These wrestlers argued that firing Drew sets a dangerous precedent and that general managers shouldn't have unilateral authority to terminate contracts without more oversight. Triple H reportedly listened to these concerns but has not yet overruled Aldis's decision, perhaps not wanting to undermine his authority. Let me share some explosive details about the lawsuit Drew's legal team is preparing. According to sources close to Drew, his lawyers are building a case that his termination was wrongful and that WWE violated terms of his contract by firing him without proper cause or due process. The lawsuit will apparently argue several key points. First, that Drew's actions were provoked by weeks of harassment and attacks from Jacob Fatu that WWE did nothing to address. Drew repeatedly requested official matches or intervention from management, but his concerns were ignored. When WWE failed to provide proper channels for resolution, Drew took matters into his own hands. The lawsuit argues WWE created the environment that led to the attack. Second, that the severity of Drew's crime doesn't justify termination when WWE has tolerated similar or worse behavior from other performers without firing them. The lawsuit will apparently cite multiple examples of wrestlers delivering brutal attacks that didn't result in termination, arguing that Drew is being held to an unfair standard. Third, that Nick Aldis had a personal bias against Drew that influenced his decision, making this a termination based on personal animosity rather than legitimate business reasons. If Drew's lawyers can prove Aldis was motivated by their backstage conflicts rather than the attack itself, that strengthens the wrongful termination claim. The potential damages Drew could seek are significant. Beyond just lost wages during his remaining contract term, Drew could argue for compensation for damage to his reputation, loss of future earning potential, and emotional distress. If the case goes to trial and Drew wins, WWE could be looking at a multi-million-dollar judgment. Now let's discuss the fan backlash because WWE is facing intense criticism from the fanbase over this decision. Social media has been flooded with fans expressing outrage at Drew's firing and calling for Nick Aldis to be removed as SmackDown GM. The hashtags #rehired Drew McIntyre and #AldisOut have been trending, showing the depth of fan anger. Many fans are pointing out that Drew was a victim of sustained harassment who finally defended himself, and punishing him while giving Fatu no consequences is backwards. They argue that if WWE wants to maintain any credibility about protecting superstars, they should have addressed Fatu's behavior before it escalated to violence. Fan petitions demanding Drew's reinstatement have gathered hundreds of thousands of signatures. Some fans are threatening to cancel their Peacock subscriptions or stop attending WWE events if Drew isn't brought back. While WWE often ignores fan complaints, the scale of this backlash is significant enough that it's causing real concern at the corporate level. There's also been a cultural conversation about workplace retaliation and how employers handle situations where employees defend themselves against harassment. Drew's situation resonates beyond just wrestling. Many people see parallels to their own workplace experiences where victims are punished while aggressors face no consequences. This has given the story mainstream attention beyond just wrestling media. Let me reveal some fascinating speculation about how this storyline might play out, because despite Drew being fired, most people believe this is ultimately a work that will lead to Drew's eventual return. WWE has a history of firing wrestlers as part of storylines, only to bring them back later in triumphant fashion. The most likely scenario is that Triple H or another authority figure overrules Aldis's decision after reviewing all the evidence, determining that Drew's termination was unjust. This would allow Drew to return as a babyface hero who was wronged by corrupt authority, with built-in sympathy from fans who sided with him during the controversy. Another possibility is that Drew fights his way back through legal means, with the lawsuit becoming part of the storyline. Maybe a judge or arbitrator rules that Drew must be reinstated, setting up a scenario where Drew returns despite Aldis's opposition. This creates ongoing tension between Drew and Aldis that can fuel future storylines. There's even potential for this to lead to Nick Aldis being removed as SmackDown GM. If enough wrestlers turn against Aldis over the Drew situation, they could demand his replacement. This would be poetic justice. Aldis firing Drew on a power trip ultimately costs Aldis his own position. The wildcard scenario is that Drew actually leaves WWE and shows up in another promotion. While this seems unlikely given WWE's investment in Drew, if negotiations break down or if WWE handles this situation poorly, Drew has options. AEW, NJPW, and other promotions would love to sign someone of Drew's caliber. The threat of Drew actually leaving might force WWE to resolve this quickly. Now let's discuss what this means for Jacob Fatu's character moving forward. Fatu was positioned as a dominant heel before this incident, but his role in getting Drew fired could take his heat to a whole new level. Fatu can now brag that he not only beats opponents in matches but gets them fired from the company entirely. However, there's risk that Fatu becomes too hated in a way that makes fans turn on him negatively rather than wanting to see him get his comeuppance. There's a fine line between heat that creates investment and heat that makes people stop watching. WWE needs to be careful about how they use Fatu's role in this situation. There's also potential backlash against Fatu from other wrestlers in storyline. If the locker room views Drew's firing as unjust, they might unite against Fatu, creating a scenario where multiple babyfaces are targeting him. This could lead to interesting faction dynamics and multi-person feuds. The eventual payoff when Drew returns, assuming he does, will be crucial. The crowd will be rabid to see Drew get revenge on Fatu, and that match needs to deliver on the months of build-up. Whether it's a standard match or a stipulation match designed to be extra brutal, Drew vs. Fatu will be one of the most anticipated encounters in WWE. Make sure you're subscribed to WrestlingNewsCC with all notifications on because Drew McIntyre's firing situation is developing rapidly with new information emerging constantly. We'll be covering every legal development, every backstage report, every hint about Drew's future. Drop a comment right now with your opinion on Nick Aldis firing Drew McIntyre. Was it justified or completely wrong? Do you think Drew will return or is he really done with WWE? Should Aldis face consequences for this decision? How should this situation be resolved? I want to hear your thoughts. Smash that like button if you think Drew McIntyre was wrongfully fired and deserves immediate reinstatement. Drew is one of WWE's best performers and most loyal workers, and firing him over this incident is absurd. Share this video with everyone who needs to understand the injustice of what happened to Drew McIntyre. This is about more than just one firing, it's about how WWE treats its talent and whether authority figures can abuse their power without consequences. This is Wrestling News CC, bringing you coverage of the most controversial firing in WWE history. Nick Aldis terminated Drew McIntyre's contract after Drew attacked Jacob Fatu, but many believe this decision was unjust, politically motivated, and will ultimately be reversed. Whether Drew returns to WWE, takes legal action, or moves to another promotion remains to be seen. One thing is certain, this story is far from over.